to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 112. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
But right now, we're on Christmas break.
Yes, we are. Do you hear the jingle bells? I hear the jingle bells.
No, you're not allowed to. You need to stay in your own home and not participate in the jingling of the bells.
What if I jingle the bells in my own home? Can I do
That's
that?
fine. That's
With a
fine.
mask on.
Celebrate your holiday on your own time, but don't involve other people. That involves you breathing on them, maybe.
Or breathing near them or in the same room as them.
We're
Yes.
not bitter at all.
Oh, yeah, this is just a different year. Just
It's
a different
weird.
year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like hitting, I mean, it's so weird. I mean, summer with COVID was one thing, but now it's like hitting these key moments where
Yeah.
like almost universally people gather with their family
Yeah.
or friends or some group of people gathering. And then it's
Mhm.
like, oh, wow, this is extra testing to
Yeah.
be like, no, really don't do it. So,
Yeah. I mean, in the spring, we did, like, Easter, we were under full lockdown. But I feel like
Oh,
Easter
yeah.
isn't quite as big as Halloween or Thanksgiving or Christmas.
not here, not in the
Yeah.
US.
Not in the US, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think in other parts of the world, it definitely is.
Yeah.
Just as we're recording this is actually the week of Thanksgiving when we're
Mhm.
recording this. So we're definitely in the holiday spirit. Cheryl may be wearing Christmas-themed accoutrement at the moment.
That is the fanciest word for my fleece penguin pajamas I've ever heard.
So we're definitely feeling that. But as of right now, when we're recording in Washington State, we're not under full lockdown, but they have definitely increased the restriction levels because of rising COVID numbers. But the flip side is, and I don't even know if you know this, Cheryl. So within the last 2 or 3 weeks, there have been two separate companies that have released really promising data around vaccines for COVID. And just today, a third company released very similar results as well.
Wow.
So by the time this comes out, it is possible, I'm not saying it is going to be, but it's possible that we may actually have started to roll out vaccines in the US. Obviously just to, high-risk individuals, healthcare workers, frontline workers,
Yeah.
people like that, right, who should be the first ones to get it. But it's a possibility that we may start to turn the corner on this thing.
Let's hope so.
Soon-ish.
Because I need to tell you something sad related to travel that I did today, Ryan.
Uh-oh.
Now this is nowhere near canceling trips, so don't you worry.
Okay.
However, this was a moment when I had to look at my life honestly and realize that I'm not traveling very much these days.
Yeah.
We just went away for the weekend to Whidbey Island, so local weekend trip. But that involved me getting out my travel toiletries.
Okay.
Do you do travel toiletries separate?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there are a few things that are both. Like, I don't have like a separate like razor, shaver.
Yeah.
And like my comb, I think I usually bring. Like, there are a few things that I do, but I have definitely some smaller things. Like I have a smaller toothpaste and shampoo and things like that I'll just bring when traveling.
And a little cap or some way to close your toothbrush so the bristles aren't just like sitting in the bag. Yeah. So yeah, I have that, and it's just in like a plastic shoebox size box.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little
like
plastic
a bin.
box. Yeah. And so I just have all my assorted things in there, and then just pull it out and see what I want to bring and need to bring depending on the trip. and pulled it out for this weekend and realized like, oh, I've gathered a little too much, because sometimes I do the thing before a trip where I'm like, I probably need a new travel toothpaste, and so I just go buy another one. So now I have like 6 travel toothpaste.
Oh, 6. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So this bin is like very hard to close at this point. So I spread everything out on the counter and just decided I'm going to use these things. And then the next time I take a trip, I will buy a new travel whatever.
Oh, okay.
I just need to use these things up. Because also it's like, I know things don't expire that fast or anything, but still, like, I don't know, sometimes things dry out, or
yeah,
I don't know, they kind of eventually do, depending on what the product is. They can go bad eventually. And also they're just taking up a lot of space that I can't close the bin hardly. And so now I have my 6 toothpastes. They're currently on my bathroom counter. I'll just start going through those, because I'm not traveling and using the toothpaste while I'm in Europe. I'm just going to use it at my house.
You could pretend every time you get to a new little mini toothpaste container, you can pretend like you're brushing your teeth in a different country. You can even label them ahead of time. This is the Spain toothpaste.
Oh, but then it's just like my dreams going down the drain.
That is sad.
Oh.
That is definitely sad.
However, I love toiletries, and I love figuring out the perfect travel toiletries for the trip and what won't take up a lot of space but will do the job and everything. So whenever the next trip is, I will be very excited to like renew my collection of things, which should not be called a collection anymore. I don't need to collect travel toothpaste.
No, I don't think you probably need to collect those. No, that's very true. Well, at least it was related to travel and a glimpse of travel.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there's hope. We'll travel again. It'll happen.
We will definitely travel again, and maybe even in 2021. It's possible.
I hope so.
I hope so too. But we'll just have to wait and see. And what'll it look like? Who knows? I was watching a YouTube video that I just randomly came across this weekend, and it was all about airlines and how COVID-19 has broken their pricing structure. It was very interesting about how it's all been automated, right? It's all a computer system about all of these different factors that they try and do to basically not have empty planes, because empty planes cost them money, right?
Yeah.
Essentially. And so they want to have the most people on a plane. So what do they do with prices to be able to even those things out, and and how they've actually had to go to manual settings because all the computer models are based on previous year's data. And there is no data that predicts what people are doing travel-wise now.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I mean, I think that we even see that not just flying. I think we see that locally. There's times when I've gone places that have been empty, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this place is empty. Isn't it cool that like during this weird COVID time, no one's here? And then other times I've gone places where there's a ton of people, and I feel a little bit surprised, like, oh, everybody had the same idea I did today to go to this place because I can't do anything else. So it feels, to me, it feels very random, as far as like, what are people doing? What do people feel safe with? Like, is anyone going to fly for Thanksgiving? And so normally that's like one of the most expensive travel days. Yeah. And busy travel days of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to the industry on a number of levels, and just travel in general, because yes, travel will come back. There's no way it won't, because because people like you and me, and people who maybe aren't as big into travel as you and I, people are just going to want to get out because they can.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and everyone's going to want to rebook that trip that got canceled.
Yep. And I was reading some stuff online as well about how, since a lot of trips have been canceled, and people have been spending less money because they've been doing less things that cost money.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a sense that once travel starts again, people may be willing to spend more than usual, and they may splurge and do bigger trips or more extravagant trips because they have the money that they banked from this year, from 2020, that they didn't spend on the trip. So it could almost swing the other way for a little while. I don't know that I'm going to necessarily do that because I don't know that that's in my budget. But
well, Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
It's the holiday break of when this episode comes out.
Woohoo!
And you have breaks in your
I
life because you're a teacher.
Yes.
And I fondly remember those days. What's something that we like to do when we're on break and we have a little extra time on our hands?
I mean, there are so many things, but the first thing that comes to my mind is binge watch TV.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
Because why not?
I know, yeah. And you're like, oh my gosh. And also, I just want to kind of like sit on the couch and pay attention to something. Chill.
Not really do anything. I don't have to be anywhere. Nobody needs me. I don't need to, and this is going to sound funky, I don't need to be in front of a screen. I know a TV screen is still a screen, but it's really different when it's like on the other side of the room and it's really, really big and you're not crunched over on a desk. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very different sort of screen. So
yeah. Well, this summer we watched a lot of TV for this podcast. We watched travel shows, and that was very fun.
It was a lot of fun.
But there are other forms of television that involve travel that are not shows about travel.
Okay.
And so you and I watched one that is a classic show to binge watch because before Netflix and before, I don't know, even like buying shows on DVD was really a thing.
Yeah.
There were reruns. And that was like, I feel like the OG binge watching was like when you like look at the TV guide and see there's like a string of the same show. And you're like, I'm going to get that show for like 3 hours today.
Yes. Well, and they often would happen around holidays. There would be different channels would do this. I remember there was one that happened for a number of years. It was when I watched most of the Twilight Zone. I think it was like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day or something. I think like USA or FX or I don't remember, one of those channels. And they did the Twilight Zone out. And it was cute. 24 hours of the Twilight Zone, the original black and white Twilight Zone. So
that's so fun.
Yes, absolutely.
We watched I Love Lucy.
Yes, we did. An actual classic. When you say classic, it's actually classic TV.
Yes.
And oh my goodness, if you have not seen I Love Lucy before, it is so worth watching. It's definitely old. Like it's black and white.
Yep.
There are clearly cultural differences and stereotypes and things like that. But Lucille Ball is so incredibly talented. Just the physical comedy that she's able to do just with her face is so impressive.
Yeah, it's so good. I think it is funny. I think in some way the show holds up very well. I think if you start analyzing like, you know, racism and sexism are they're gonna come out.
Sure.
They will absolutely come out. However, also like I think it still holds very well, and I don't think it's any worse than anything else from its time. And so I think like there racism and sexism are certainly present, but I don't think it's like beyond anything else that was coming out then. So you can you can think what you think about that, but I think as far as just like enjoying a show from the 50s, like this is an amazing show. And like a female lead who was willing to look ugly for comedy. Like
Mm-hmm.
she is groundbreaking, and I think you can tell by the way the audience is losing their minds.
Yes.
Because there are some of the bits she does that I'm like, I'm assuming I would laugh even harder if I were in the studio audience, and if this wasn't like a trope by this point that was started by the show and now is overdone, but was original back then.
Yep.
But then also, I think part of it's like the idea of a woman, doing some of these things is like, oh wow, she's like not all put together. Like she looks all crazy and is willing to do all this physical comedy in a space that I think before had been much more of a man's space. And
absolutely,
that's really cool.
And in addition to that, because I was thinking about that too. Yeah, she is. I mean, the show is named after her. She is the main talent. She's in all the episodes, and yes, she's a wacky, crazy character, but she's a likable, lovable character. Like there's never, it's not that, well, she's just kind of the idiot that everybody else has to tolerate. She does dumb things, right? But all the characters end up doing dumb things at some point. Yes. And her husband is Cuban. Like both actually in real life, because they were actually married, but then also on the show. And so again, for the 1950s, a multiracial marriage on TV in a show with a woman lead, like, again, now we say, well, yeah, of course it should be. But at that time, like you said, that was groundbreaking.
Yes.
Groundbreaking.
Yes. Yeah. I was just doing some reading about this show today, and I was reading some different websites, and I mean, it's just always hard to tell, like, am I reading facts or like, but it seemed like I was finding some good sources. I'm not sure, but I was reading that they didn't want, like, the network didn't think that they would buy Ricky as her husband because he was Cuban. And so I don't know then if that is true. I don't know, like, why did they do it anyway? Like, what was it that made that work or anything? But that also makes total sense because that's a big deal. I was also reading that it was kind of an unwritten rule that she would be the only one to make fun of his accent, because she makes fun of his accent constantly.
A lot.
That's like a like classic piece. If you were to describe the show, that's definitely like a key element, but no one else does. Like sometimes people don't understand him, but she's the only one to make fun of him. And so that was kind of an interesting piece too.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. So
but Cheryl, it's a great show. We just talked about why. Yes. What does it have to do with travel? This is a travel podcast. Why did we watch this great show other than because it's great?
Because for an entire season, they are traveling, and we love it. So during the start, actually, it's end of season 4 and then start of season 5, we get some U.S. travel. So the show takes place in New York. It was filmed in LA, but the setting of the show is New York. And so they take a trip out to LA, and then they have a bunch of episodes there. And then for is it like 13 episodes or so, they go to Europe.
Yeah. It's hard to know exactly for sure because it doesn't really, right now we can't find all of them available to stream. So it's kind of hard to know exactly how many episodes it is, but yeah, it's very interesting.
We start this storyline that they will go to Europe in episode 10, and then in episode 26 they fly home from Europe.
Okay.
And so it's like a big chunk. Now, what's very funny, another thing I found out today, actually what started my rabbit hole of Googling things, was I had told you about these Europe episodes, and I was like, Ryan, you have to watch these Europe episodes of I Love Lucy. And you and I were like, well, of course they went and did a ton of episodes there because it was probably really expensive for their show to travel to Europe, so might as well like make the most of it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And then I was watching this, and I was like, man, that Eiffel Tower in the background of the window just doesn't look particularly real.
They shot it all on sound stages in LA. They didn't actually go anywhere.
They didn't actually go anywhere. So
nope.
I was kind of bummed because I kept waiting for some scene where they were on a real street. And I was like, nope. That's also a soundstage. Nope, that's indoors in a sound. Yep. Like, and it was like, oh, okay, well. However, I think that, you and I are going to talk about some of the differences between 1950s travel to Europe and, 2020 minus COVID travel to Europe. Yeah. And I think one of them is that if you're gonna go, you might as well go for a while back then because of how difficult and expensive it was to get there. And I mean, it also makes sense because the reason they go to Europe is because Ricky has kind of finally made it with his band as a musician. And so he's going to go tour. And so that actually is such a good plot device because then they can go to different cities and different countries and be there for a while. But they honestly, you and I have both watched a lot of episodes from this stretch now, and man, they represent so many elements of travel. It's in the different episodes. Well, I mean, we start with in episode 11, Lucy has a hard time getting her passport, which made me very sad. So
Why did
I
it
watched
make you very sad?
Well, if listeners want to hear why that made me so sad, they can listen to episode 59 of our podcast, where I share about how a week before my honeymoon, I had to cancel and rebook a trip because my husband was not able to get his passport.
Which was almost exactly a year from right now when we're recording. Not quite.
Oh, yeah.
But almost exactly a year ago from right now.
Yeah, this time a year ago, I was stressing majorly about will we actually be able to go on this trip. And I think it's shows like this and many moments in my life where things have just kind of worked out that led me to believe no, it's going to work out. He'll get it. And then he didn't. Yep. And so, and we're like, oh, we are not going and we are rebooking our trip. And I mean, we had a great honeymoon in New Orleans. Honestly, it was wonderful. But that episode, oh my gosh, where she because she can't find her birth certificate. And then the town doesn't have her birth certificate that she was born in. She's calling them. And so then she has to get two people who were there when she was born to sign an affidavit. But then one of the women who was what used to be her babysitter won't sign it. She says she will, but then her husband sees a date and he's like, well, you're not very good at arithmetic. You weren't even born then, because she lied to her husband about her age. So she just won't sign it because her husband thinks she's 29. And then eventually the doctor who delivered her comes and he's ready to sign it. And then magical moment, her mom mails her birth certificate because she said, actually, you're born in the town over. Oh, and thought you might want this. So it all just works out.
Yep.
She just gets it. It's all fine, even though everybody's stressing. And so, but I mean, getting a passport is a headache. It was also hilarious. The next episode, they're in the passport office for something, and there's no lines and there's no one else present in the lobby. And I was like, that's not a passport office at all.
So how much of that do you think is a difference in time, and how much of that is just Hollywood?
It has to be just Hollywood, because
that's my guess too.
I'm sure there were less Americans getting passports back then than there are now.
Yeah.
But they were living in New York going to the passport office. I'm sure it wasn't empty. Because then a part of that storyline too is that they don't like their photos. So they're like, oh, we'll just get new photos. And now that I'm not sure, because I don't know. I honestly don't know what the process of getting a passport was back then or what the wait time was. So it's possible that could have been a thing back then. But that was very funny because the concept of just willy-nilly getting a new photo for your passport a couple days before your trip It's like, no, you're going to live with that photo that you don't like,
Yeah.
actually, for 10 years.
Yeah. Unless you want to go through the process to get a whole new passport.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just get a new photo.
Yeah. So, that all hit home a little bit for me.
Yeah, sorry.
So, Ryan, I've seen all these episodes before. It's been a while, but I've seen them before and honestly remembered most of them. So for me, it was more of a refresher.
Yeah.
Have you seen these before? Were they new for you? What was your experience?
So I think I probably have, because growing up, we used to watch I Love Lucy on Nick at Night all the time. But I definitely haven't seen them since I've been an adult. So it's been 20, 25 years probably since I've seen them. So a number of the ones that I watched didn't seem familiar at all. Or there were components of them. And I was like, oh, that looks familiar. And then the rest was like, not. Like one of the ones that we watched is a classic episode, like one that is, repeated and seen in a lot of ways, is where Lucy is in Italy. Well, they're all in Italy, and she goes to observe a vineyard and a winery, and through a whole bunch of ridiculous shenanigans, she ends up with an Italian woman in this big vat of grapes with bare feet, and they will have to like tromp around and squish the grapes with their feet to make wine. Or, I mean, obviously that doesn't make the wine, but for, to get the juice out of the grapes or whatever. And then of course they end up wrestling and throwing stuff at each other because they bumped into each other. It's
amazing.
It's hilarious.
It's so good. I'm reading here that in 1997, TV Guide ranked this episode number 18 on its list of 100 greatest episodes.
Of that show? Or 100 greatest episodes of all
time.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this has nothing to do with travel, but there are two that come to mind that I would rate as better than this one. And I'm curious which ones because you've seen them all. I don't know if I've seen them all, but the two, the one of the other ones that I think is extra classic is Lucy in the Chocolate Factory.
Mm-hmm.
And that one gets spoofed a lot. But then my favorite, Vitamin Benjamin.
It's so good.
My family and I, we still quote that to each other from time to time.
Do you pop out at parties? Are you
unpopular?
Yeah, but this is very good. And apparently they filmed this in California at a vineyard, but the woman actually only spoke Italian. The actress. And so they had a interpreter for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I was wondering as I was watching a number of these episodes, because there were times where, and obviously I only speak English. I don't speak other languages. But that being said, I feel like I have a decent ear. Like I can hear sounds in other languages, even if I can't make them with my mouth. And not always, not all languages, not all the time. There are times where I don't hear the difference between those two things. But I think I generally can hear a fair number of differences. And some of the people speaking, it sounded to me like, you sound like a native speaker. And other people didn't. Right?
They seemed like they were doing a caricature of someone from that country.
Or sometimes when they would speak in English with an accent, sometimes it's like, I don't feel like that's a real accent, right? Like you are trying to make that accent. And other times I was like, wow, if that's not really an accent, that's very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, which makes sense if they're filming this in California, that maybe they could get some people who are either from those countries or at least spoke those languages. And then other ones you're like, I think that's a U.S. actor doing a terrible French accent. Especially if they're only speaking English and they're just speaking with an accent the whole time, Yeah. Because some of the characters, they have them speak a great deal in another language. And sometimes they're just speaking in English to our main characters.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that was something I found interesting in some of the episodes that I saw. Our main characters pretty much just spoke English. Like they didn't attempt to engage in the native language. But then there were other episodes where they totally did. I'm thinking the one where Lucy is in Paris. And there's that's the one that you had me watch because of the translation scene.
We have to talk about this scene. Oh my gosh. So this is a scene that lives in my memory, you know, like the chocolate factory or the grapes or things like this. And I wasn't sure. I couldn't figure out for the longest time which episode it was in because I just remember this one scene. And I was like, I don't know. Lucy gets in trouble. So that doesn't narrow it down.
That's like every episode. Yeah.
And she gets in trouble with the law. Also doesn't necessarily narrow it down. She gets in trouble with the law all the time. But I was so excited because one of the episodes I chose to watch, it was in it. And this whole episode, actually, I do want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because this episode is like, if you were going to go on a trip to Europe for the first time in your life and you had a nightmare about everything that could possibly go wrong on your trip to Europe, that is this episode is
That's
that
so
nightmare.
true.
It's the things that people warn you about.
Yep.
And it's like, is this episode? And then I want to know because we don't know how people viewed travel to Europe or to any other country in the 50s. And so it's hard to know, like, were these things that were already kind of like in the mindset of Americans of like, you're going to go to Europe and you're going to get like counterfeit money and it's going to be a big problem. Like, are those the things that people are already thinking about? Or is it shows like this that like made people start worrying about those things? Because it could go either way, or it could just like amplify a worry that people already have. Because this show was so watched that I feel like it did influence culture.
Absolutely.
And even though, you know, we've talked about the idea of like, there used to be the advice of like, do not wear sneakers if you're going to Europe. Sneakers will give you away that you're an American. They will know right away. Like pickpockets will target you as a result. People will start speaking English to you right away. And so if you want the local experience, and then now we go to Europe and it's like everyone is wearing sneakers. And so that's no longer true, but that was true at a time. And so this feels like that where like, so even like Ricky is worried about her going out on her own because she doesn't know French, which is like any of these major tourist cities that you go to, you could just go through your life speaking English in them. And like, you will find people, you know, who will be able to speak back to you. And so,
but even just the difference with her, because she had a phrase book.
Yes.
We don't use phrase books anymore because we have the internet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and
Google
Google Translate and all of these different apps and ways to translate languages that we didn't even have those 20 years ago, let alone what with the 1950s, what was that? 70 years ago?
Yeah. And I think it was 99, 98 when I went to Japan and my parents bought me an electronic translator, and that was a pretty big deal to have an electronic version of it, and then did English and Japanese back and forth. And then she's convinced that she's going to discover an artist who's like undiscovered, and then someday the painting she buys will like be worth millions. And it's like she gets conned. The guy has like copies of the same piece in his briefcase, and so like one of the funny things at the end is that each of them bought the same painting individually from him.
And that's an example of what you said earlier, where like I figured that out super early in the show. But is it because that type of gag was invented at that time? And so like the audiences at the time, did they know that was going to be the case, or was it a surprise when they got to the end?
I don't know, because all of the gigs in the show are just like so overdone, but I don't think they were overdone back then.
Yeah, I don't think
It's
so.
so long ago now that it's like, but now it's hilarious because you're like, oh, whatever. That's like the oldest bit or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's an old show.
Yep.
Yeah, and then she gets conned into exchanging her money for counterfeit money by a guy on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes to this cafe and like has a hard time ordering, and she's by herself. But
she's trying to do it all in French. So she's got her phrase book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I was really impressed with that. Because again, some of the other episodes I had seen, they didn't really seem to try and engage in whatever the native language was.
Yeah.
But this episode, that was actually, language was a key component of, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the gags, but right, but it was a key component of the episode, which I thought was kind of cool.
Well, and a really cute part of that is that the waiter, I think there's no way he would have actually thought this, but he like assumes that she is from there.
Yeah.
It was like, she's not doing a good job with her French. There's no way. But then Fred and Ethel come by in this giant tour group, and they're like, oh, it's Lucy. And then Lucy like pretends to be this like local French woman.
Yep.
And she's like, what are you talking about? And then they're telling Fred and Ethel like, don't bother the people in the cafe. Come on. So actually that was a really like classic moment that I think we still face today. Like, do you try to live like a local when you're traveling, or do you choose to be in the tour group? You know, like Lucy's experience there versus Fred and Ethel's was really different. But then, she accidentally orders escargot. Mm-hmm. And then the chef yells at her, and then she pays in this counterfeit money.
The chef yells at her because she wants to put ketchup on it. And so he, as a good French chef, is like, no, you cannot. He like comes out from the kitchen. No, you cannot. I mean, this is all in French, so I don't actually know what words he's saying. But that's also something I thought that they did really well. None of that stuff was ever translated.
Yes.
It's all just in French.
Because that's like the point of the story. They actually stayed loyal to their story that she didn't understand the language. And so they stayed consistent with that. But like, and even that, it's like the stereotype of like French people being like snobby and like, I've heard people say like, you try to speak French there and like they don't even think that it's like cool for you to try. Like so many places you go and people love it when you try in their language, and they're like, but not in Paris. Everyone's so stuck up and no one wants to help you. And then that has not been my experience at all. Right. Yeah. But it's like, well, maybe it was, or maybe it's shows like this that like
that established that. Yeah.
That like it's a stereotype from this like fictional story that was shot in Hollywood. You know, with like who knows if these actors, I mean, I think they did at least speak French for reals because they were saying a lot of French phrases.
Yeah, I think so.
But
too.
So then like she gets in trouble, like they like yell at her about the ketchup, but then stop her because she paid in counterfeit money, and then she gets arrested. And it's like all these things that you're like, oh my gosh, if that happened on a trip, like that's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
And then we get to the scene though that is so good. And so right before she's brought in, this drunk guy who speaks Spanish is brought in, and you think it's like a little whatever establishing shot of the police station. And then she's able to get a phone call, and so she says, Ricky, I'm in the Bastille. But then she tells him, no one speaks English here, they're all foreigners.
Yeah, that was and the good thing is they said that they had Lucy say that line intentionally knowing that wasn't the true case. Like she was the foreigner in that context.
Yes.
Right. And so kind of playing up to that. And I kind of appreciate that because I do think that sometimes we can have that mentality, even those of us that travel a lot. Right. Yeah. It's like, well, why aren't they going to do it X way? Right. Because that's the way we're used to, or it's just making it very, very clear that that's what she's thinking.
Yeah. You're right. They show her as the ignorant one. In that moment, and it's aware of that, because it is so funny how many times, you know, we have where we live, we have people from all over the world move here, and we expect them to learn our language and conform to our culture and not stand too close to us in line, even if wherever they're from, they stand closer to each other. Like all these things of like, no, you need to live like we live and be like us here. And then we go to those countries and expect to be catered to and be able to stay like Americans and for people to already know English. And a lot of that is because a lot of people already do know English, and so like a lot of that's true. But I think I liked earlier with, I mean, a part of it was she was also being arrested, but, with trying, I think trying your best with like, what are locals eating? How are locals acting and speaking and all these things? And as opposed to just like expecting like, well, they're all foreigners. So I like that. But the peak scene, the wonderful scene in this episode is that Ricky comes and he speaks English and Spanish. And then the two French police officers learn that he speaks Spanish, and they're like, well, we don't. Oh, that drunk guy. So they bring the drunk guy out.
Because the drunk guy speaks Spanish and German.
Yes.
And there's one of the other police officers that speaks German and French. And in the main police, I don't know if he's the captain or whatever, he only speaks French.
Yes. So we have this line of people going back and forth as she's trying to explain herself. And they're saying, you have this counterfeit money. And she's saying, like, do I look like someone, who would have counterfeit money, or, different things like that. But every person, as they translate, like, does the hand motions like the person who said the thing, and just like the inflection. And so like as Ricky ends up being the one who's speaking to Lucy, translating for this police officer, he's like yelling at her like the police officer's yelling at her, and then Lucy does something dramatic, and each person translating does that dramatic thing back and forth. And oh my gosh, I love it so much. Oh my goodness.
And obviously it's comedic and it's over the top and it's exaggerated, but I think it represents a real thing that happens with international travel. And I know people who have been in this situation where they don't speak the same language. Neither of them natively speak a language, but each of them speaks another language that they share in common. And so they end up communicating, each of them, through a second or third or fourth, because most people, I don't know about most, but a lot of people in the world speak way more languages than we do. So it's comedic and it's funny and, lost in translation kind of idea. But at the same time, it's a real way that when you're traveling, sometimes you have to communicate.
Yeah.
Is through those additional languages. So
yeah, so I
appreciate that.
That was a good moment of like something that does happen in travel. I know at one place I stayed in Spain, in the little town up north, Mutriku. I stayed with this couple who were, I want to say, from Norway. I'm not 100% remembering. They were from one of the countries more up north. And so Spanish was their second language, but they had lived in Spain for a long time. They were friends of the people I knew there. And so, made that connection and stayed with them. And so we spoke Spanish to each other, but to both of us, that was a second language, not like our mother tongue. And then they spoke a little bit of English to me, but English was like their third language. So it was more like, no, we'll meet in the middle with Spanish. And so that was like an interesting layer of culture and communication, because staying with them, it was also like, I'm staying with people who have lived in Mutriku for, I think, like 10 or so years. So like at this point, this is their home. But like, I was even wondering, like, what in their apartment is like because they're from Norway and what is because they live in Spain now, what pieces of how they live their lives and their culture are from where and everything. And so that was an interesting experience for me. Yeah
See, you've even lived it yourself.
But and then this was very cute though, because all these things, like, this is like a terrible day. Like, I'm surprised they didn't go home after this experience
right?
that they had. But there is a line that I love. I forget who says it, because then Fred and Ethel are brought in also for using the counterfeit money that Lucy gave them.
Right.
It says, you got to do something that very few Americans get to do. You got to see the inside of a French jail.
Yep.
And I loved that perspective on a really terrible experience while traveling. Is like, well, it was unique, and like they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
If they are real people.
Well,
so.
True. Well, I mean, and that's a similar thing, and I'm not always great at this, and I think I have mentioned this on the podcast before, but one of the things that I've kind of tried to do while traveling is, even when things, aren't necessarily going well, just recognizing and kind of framing it in the fact that at least I'm somewhere cool where it's happening. So like when I went to Australia, I got sick while I was in Australia, and like real not good sick. And I not while I was like sick, but even afterwards I was like, well, but at least I got sick in Australia, right? Because it's like that meant I was in Australia. Yes, I was sick, and that part wasn't great, but at least it meant that I got to be in Australia, And so it's like, oh, we got lost. Yeah, but I got lost in Venice, or whatever. So it's like saying that, yes, okay, sometimes those bad things happen, but if they happen and you're still in a cool place, and as long as, it ends up where you end up being safe and okay, maybe not, the way you initially wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a cool experience.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So. And then I think also you learn. You learn like sometimes, honestly, there is no lesson to be learned, unfortunately. And it's like, no, that thing just happened and there's nothing I could do to prevent it. And other times it's like, oh, I should have given myself an additional hour for this thing, or I should have had cash on me, or I should have not trusted this person. There's different things like that. And so I think even like taking that episode, like if those are common things that happen, and I'm not sure if they are, I'm not sure how many artists are like scamming people, or different things like that. Yeah. But if they are, then there are things you can learn from that. Yeah. Like, don't let some stranger on the street exchange your money for you, even if he gives you a better price. Which, like, find a reputable.
You shouldn't do that anyway.
Yes, yeah. So it's like, don't do that. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think a lot of this is that she's too trusting in this in that episode too.
Yes.
And then it gets her into trouble.
Yeah.
But it's such a funny episode.
It is a funny episode. Okay, speaking of funny though, Cheryl, and I don't know if you went back and watched this or not, but I feel like we at least briefly need to talk about the episode where they go, and I'm putting that in quotes, to Scotland. Because we had our original plan for this, our podcast episode, was to try and do kind of like we did with the travel shows this summer, where we'd each watch an episode of a place that we've been and then one place that we haven't been. And Scotland
then when we realized that all of it was shot in a sound stage, that kind of went out the window.
So we adjusted. But Scotland was the place that neither of us have been, that we were like, hey, let's watch that episode. I don't... It's so weird, Cheryl. The episode is so weird. So
it's
just
the most like a play out of any.
Oh, no, it's
episodes.
Not like a play. It is a play.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's all Lucy's dream.
The whole episode.
So they're in Europe. They must be in the UK somewhere, I think, because they're talking about she wants to go up because her ancestors are there, the McGillicuddies, and she wants to go there. And Ricky says no. And they go to bed, of course, in two separate beds, because that's what they did at that point in time with TV. And she falls asleep, and you get like the wonderful ripple effect. And all of a sudden she's in whatever the Scottish town is. Very clearly fake. Like, it's not even trying to look real, I don't think. It's very stylized.
Yeah, it just looks like a set.
It does.
Like a stage set.
Yeah, Exactly, like a theater stage. Yeah. And there's, and again, I'm going to use quotes, Scottish people there, because that's a great example of where pretty sure none of them were actually Scottish. And they're all doing terrible accents.
Yeah.
And it's like intentionally terrible. Like they would just
Yeah.
roll their R's like all the time. It's like, oh, this is painful. And then there was a musical. And they did like musical numbers one after the other. And there was this whole thing about a two-headed dragon, which ended up being Fred and Ethel. And it was just,
and then Ricky
so
is there, and he's like a Spanish Scottish person. Like they make all sorts of like, that's some of the peak of the like where this show goes into racism and everything was like the dragon doesn't want to eat him because Spanish food always like makes their stomach upset. And yeah, that was something.
It was such a weird episode. I was like, it
I
has nothing to do with real Scotland. Yeah. It had nothing to do with actual Scotland.
Mm-mm.
Like they were wearing kilts.
Okay, so I'm seeing now that this episode was copying a musical called Brigadoon.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And then it was a film in 1954. So shortly
about
before
the time this came out.
It's a musical that is two American tourists stumble upon Brigadoon, a mysterious Scottish village that appears only one day every 100 years. And Tommy, one of the tourists, falls in love with Fiona, a young woman from Brigadoon. So I think this was like supposed to be a reference to that.
I'll bet it was way funnier if I had that context.
Because if they're like doing all these references to this like film that just came out a couple years ago, then that would be much more entertaining.
Yeah. That makes, because I do think the name of the town was something else, Dune, like Cara Dune or something like that. So
yeah. I also read that the guy who plays the mayor is the one who wrote all the songs for that episode.
Oh,
so that's kind of
okay. Congratulations!
I'm happy for him.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't great.
It was weird. It was so weird. It makes
bizarre.
So much more sense that it's a reference.
Yes,
but
because that means that it's like a parody.
Yes, I wanted to see a Scotland episode.
Me too.
And we watched a play instead.
We watched a play that was a spoof of another play that we had never seen.
Yes.
Oh boy.
And were there any other things that you wanted to talk about from like themes that you noticed? Or here's one thing. I just wanted to ask you, like, what else did you notice about the differences in how they traveled compared to how we travel today?
In the episodes that I watched, they didn't do a lot of actual travel. There was one, I don't remember which one, where they were on a train. Was that the French one? It was the beginning of the one in Paris, because that's when they meet Italy. It was the Italy one, because that's when they meet the guy who wants her to be in the movie, which is why she ends up going to the vineyard, right? And so they're in like a train car berth, that's the word for it, and they like and it's like this big long bench seat, and they talk about how in Europe you have to be so small, right, because it's for 4 people and we can only fit 3 people. And then it's just a side note, because there, like you mentioned, there are some things that are, culturally just we're not acceptable of those things anymore. A running gag in the whole show, Fred, Ethel's husband, and they're both, Fred and Ethel are friends of Lucy and Ricky. He's constantly making fun of Ethel's weight. She is not
So is Lucy.
Fat.
So Lucy does too.
She is not fat, like at all.
She's smaller than me.
Yeah.
She's got to be small. She's like, I don't know. She's like not only like kind of not fat. She's like a very appropriate and healthy weight.
Yes.
For a woman of her height. Like she looks.
And age.
Yes. She
because
looks
Fred
like
and Ethel
the
are
correct
older than
size.
Yes.
Or on the small side.
Yes.
And yeah, you're right. Lucy makes fun of Ethel's size though too. They make fun of it when she eats, of like how much she's able to eat, and like if she can fit in different things. And also like Fred is overweight.
Yes,
and
he
they
is.
Don't make fun of his weight.
He totally
they make fun of her weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, that struck me as really bizarre because when I watched it before, I was a kid and I didn't, okay, they're the jokes. They are what they are. I don't really, have a context.
You don't think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm like, she is not overweight. Separate from the fact you shouldn't be making fun of someone because of their weight. Just even separate from that. Like, she's not overweight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, she's like you said, she's a healthy weight, healthy size.
Probably like completely below the American average.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that made me kind of sad.
Yeah. It always,
to be able to see
whenever I hear those jokes about Ethel's weight, it just makes me so sad too. Yeah. And even when you see her and Lucy standing next to each other, I'm like, aren't they the same size? Like,
I mean, I do think Lucy is so similar, thinner, but
yes, but like
still
hardly. Yeah. It's just like,
the other part that, and I know this isn't directly related to travel, but the other thing that I thought was interesting, they also, there are a number of times where for a number of different characters, always female, there was an issue about their age.
Oh yeah.
You already mentioned that with when Lucy was trying to get her birth certificate and that other, woman who was her like nanny or babysitter or whatever, right? She wouldn't tell the truth about her age. And there was one time where, I think in the same episode, Lucy doesn't want to admit when.
Yeah, she won't tell her best friend what year she was born in.
Yeah. And that's so interesting. I was like, that must be a cultural shift.
Yeah.
Like I do remember growing up and like, well, you never ask a woman her age. Like I remember that's a thing. But there's a difference between never asking someone their age and being like full on ashamed of your age. And that's, I just found that surprising.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is slowly going away, of being ashamed of age. I think there's different thoughts about aging now than there were back then. Even like, I remember several years ago, I was at church and this little kid asked my mom how old she was. And my mom was just like, I'm 59 years old. Just like, and it just was like, not even a thing. And I was just like, good for you, Mom, because she's of the age where I think her parents, like her mom, probably wouldn't have said that a long time ago. You know what I mean? And so, or even like, I remember when I was a kid, I had this neighbor who turned 80 and we went to wish her a happy birthday. And she said, I'm going to tell people I'm 90 so that they say, oh, you look so young.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and I know people still kind of, but I feel like people our age, like anything we would say about our age would just be 100% a joke. You know what I mean? It wouldn't even be like any amount of truth about like actually caring if people knew ages or anything. But it's so weird that it wasn't that long ago that I think that was a big cultural thing. And her hair color. Yes. Her hair not being naturally red comes up a lot too. And that is like another big deal. And that, and then also I remember like there was this popular hair dye commercial that was like something with the idea of like only her hairdresser knows what
would know for sure.
Yeah, like what her actual hair color is or whatever. And so, and now with hair dye, it's like, well, and also like we make it obvious. We do like ombre and all this stuff where it's like, look, you can see my roots are a different color than the ends, and doesn't that look cool? You know, or like, and so it's like totally different from that. But and those are things that I'm sure are exaggerated in the show, but I think they come from a very real place.
I think so too.
Of thinking that Ethel is fat or thinking that age or hair color things. Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I was definitely disappointed that they didn't actually go to any of those places, like we talked about at the beginning. Which once I thought about it, I was like, well, of course, we're so used to on location, or at the very least, like blue screen, green screen. You do a digital background to put people in places where they aren't, but it looks like they are, like all of those things. And that just wasn't what they did.
It was so
at that
expensive.
period of time. So, I mean, it's still so expensive. We just spend it now.
Yeah, that's part of it. But I think like just travel was so expensive.
Yes,
back
and
then.
difficult.
Hopping on a plane or,
yeah,
And that was the thing I noticed was they took a boat to Europe.
Yeah.
And their plan was to take a boat home. And then Ricky last minute found out about a new job opportunity. And so they chose to take a plane and had to eat like the cost. And apparently it was like way more expensive to do the plane than the boat. I think they did the boat because it was a cheaper option.
Yeah.
Now, like, no.
Like, can you get a boat? I mean, I'm sure you can. But
Well, Doug Walsh did. Because they rode their bikes to the East Coast and then took a boat over to Europe.
That's true.
And they said you can bring anything with you that you can fit in your cabin. And so they fit their bikes in their cabin. But I doubt it was cheaper than a plane.
Yeah, probably not.
Because now I think it's like the time that they are serving you as the customer, and it's like, that's why like trains can be more expensive too, it's because like, I don't think trains are like the cheaper option either, I just was looking at like, oh, what would it cost to take a train to Chicago? Would that be fun? Sometime, because you can from Seattle to Chicago. And then I looked at the price and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that trip. So, it's just things have flipped as far as like what costs different amounts and everything.
Yeah.
I watched the final Europe episode where they fly home. And when they learn that they're flying home instead of taking a boat, they're worried about like all their souvenirs and all the stuff that they bought. And Lucy bought a 25-pound cheese for her mom. And
of course.
Yeah. Oh, and they did say that it was 66 pounds was free to check a bag. And then after that, you had to pay like a certain amount per pound. So that was interesting.
That's a lot of free checked poundage there.
So there's a difference. I mean, if that's true, that number is probably based on something that's true though, So anyway, she pretends that the cheese is a baby.
Of course she does.
And then eventually she learns, because she thought babies are free. Then eventually she learns babies are not free. So then she and Ethel try to eat the cheese.
On the plane.
And then they stuff the rest of it in the instruments from the band members. I don't know how they got into those instruments without no one noticing. I started thinking about the logistics of that, and I was like, that wouldn't happen. But so they do all these funny gags with like a mom with a real baby sitting next to her on the plane, because Ricky goes to the lounge because there's a lounge in the back of the plane that you can just get up and go hang out somewhere else. What?
For everybody?
I don't know.
Because like Fancy Pants First Class has stuff like that.
Maybe, I don't know. They didn't really say that they were flying first class, but I don't know if that was actually the case or not for everybody. And this other woman just comes and sits next to her and everyone's fine with it. So also I was like, are there not assigned scenes? I was confused about how all of that worked.
Is that just a TV show thing?
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, I don't know what was the culture and what was the show.
Yeah.
But they did lots of funny gags with that, and then like she has to go to customs when they land, and so that was fun. I enjoyed that. So Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
We have a couple questions that we like to ask after our travel shows. So
yes, we do. This will be interesting to see how they work.
Let's see what happens with our standard questions that we asked all summer long after each of our travel shows.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is based on the title of our podcast, Take Me With You. If you could take yourself to just one thing on the soundstage, what would it be and why? Are we going to pretend that these were real locations?
Yes, I think we should.
Okay. What would it be and why?
Oh, that's tricky. Well, definitely not Scotland.
You didn't want to be in that play?
No. It was creepy and weird.
Now I want to watch that movie, though.
Kind of. Brigadoon.
Right?
That name sounds familiar to me.
Yes. Yeah.
I know I've heard it before. I actually think if it's because it's, one moment, it's not all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that cafe in Paris that she went to. Not because I'm all that interested in escargot necessarily, but it was, it was outdoors, it was outside. It's like kind of that quintessential Parisian cafe where you can like sit and like watch people who are walking by and that sort of thing. I think that might be kind of fun.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
That does.
What about you?
I mean, there was a scene in that Paris episode where there was an overlay of her face looking like in awe of different buildings that were like going. It was like the funniest, like stylized thing. But so that looked like a weird trip. I mean,
a trip. I see what you mean.
I think I gotta go to that vineyard and
you think
smash
so?
some grapes and not get in a fight because I'm not very like a combative person, and I would probably have a nice time with this lovely Italian woman smashing grapes together.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a wonderful. I mean, being in a vineyard in Italy, like I'm there. So
awesome.
Yeah. Or on the plane, because it would be so interesting to fly in the 50s. Wouldn't that be interesting?
It would
you
be.
Could be on a plane in the 50s?
Yes, except I would be more afraid to fly in the 50s. Not so much because of, the things that we're afraid of nowadays for flying, but like the planes themselves, the technology wasn't as advanced. Like there'd be a higher chance that the plane might have an issue. Now, not that I really think that most planes had issues because they didn't, but yeah, I don't know. But that experience would be, they'd probably be slower though too. Probably be a longer
would be slower.
flight.
But like, I feel like customers got more like treatment. Like even in this episode, this woman offers to like warm up her baby's bottle. Again, obviously that's a bit because she doesn't have a baby, but like,
I think they would do that on an actual plane.
Do you think so?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I think so.
Maybe I should, I don't know, bring a baby on a plane. I don't want to bring a baby on a plane. That sounds terrible.
No.
Especially like overnight to Europe. Oh. That sounds bad.
Yeah, no thank you.
I would like to be able to witness what air travel was like in the 50s.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah. That would be interesting.
Did these episodes make you want to go to Europe more than before watching / did the Scotland episode make you want to go to Scotland more than before watching that episode?
Oh my gosh, no. Oh, no. I mean, I think I have to answer no only because we didn't really see the real places.
Yeah.
And so it really didn't have the allure of those places because they weren't really in those places. And for the most part, other than some backdrops that were outside of hotel windows, you didn't even really see many of the iconic sites in any of the places that they went.
They downplayed it so much. I was expecting more fake backdrops at least.
Yeah.
Or like talking about like seeing the Arc de Triomphe, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, or Lucy went to the Champs-Elysees to go shopping and spent too much money. Or they're just things, and they didn't. And I don't know if it's because they couldn't do a good enough recreation on the soundstage, so they decided to just avoid it. I don't know if maybe those things weren't as iconic in the 50s as they are now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
How about for you?
I mean,
you're ready to go to Scotland. I know.
We were just talking about what if we go to Scotland after Jack graduates from high school and do like camping in Scotland and go to distilleries and hiking and stuff like that. So that's the current dream with Scotland.
That's what?
So 11 years? 11
away?
and a half years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not too long, honestly, when it comes to like planning big trips to other countries, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to go to that version of Scotland, though.
No.
I mean, the musical part and the dancing, I'm into that. But showing up to a town, looking for your ancestors and being told you're going to be fed to a dragon is like not my jam.
Not on your list of things to do.
No. But in general, watching these episodes made me long for travel to Europe more.
Mm.
You know, just thinking about it.
Sure.
And everything.
Yeah.
Based on your viewing of these episodes, would you travel with Lucy?
Are we talking Lucy Ricardo the character?
Yes.
Or Lucille Ball the person?
The character.
I don't think that would be wise.
Because you don't want to get arrested, is that why?
Or any of the other crazy things that always happen to her. I think that it would be stressful for me. What about you?
Yeah. I don't think so. I just I don't, as much as I like viewing, like looking on the bright side and being positive, I am not someone who it's like, oh yeah, it's better to have gotten arrested to have the story. You know, it's like, no, I just don't want to get in trouble with the law. In the first place. And I don't want to piss off the waiter, and I don't want to offend the local. You know, like I want to I want to do the version of travel that Lucy did right at that moment when she was sitting in the cafe before anything went wrong, where she was like just eating like the locals do and enjoying and everything, and like I want that. But then once everything started going wrong, which it always does for her, I'm like, no, I don't want to be friends with that person. Especially on the trip, you know, like not so much. A good travel companion.
No.
Yeah. Would you recommend this show?
Yes, absolutely. I like we've discussed, there are definitely some things that, because it's, you know, about 70 years old, you got to keep those in mind. And if those are things that are extra bothersome for you, then I would say you can definitely avoid the show. But if you go into the show with an understanding of the time in which it was made, and if that is something that you can still appreciate in spite of its failings, then I think it's really funny. It's a really well done show. I think it is iconic. It is classic in the true sense of the word classic. And like you said, I think it defined a lot of what comedy in the US and on TV is and has been for a long time. So
yeah,
I would say yes. What about you?
I agree with everything you said about it. Yeah. Yeah. I think that I think just like seeing something that established so much of what we know today is just like a good education in TV, you know, like, just like it's an important part of like, it's like watching Star Wars or things like that. You know, it's like there are some things that we call classics and it's like, but also it's going to be really boring.
Yeah.
But maybe watch it because it's a classic. And this is not one of those. This is like, you will be entertained, and it's a classic that it like, there's a reason it's so popular. So, yeah.
And I think you're right. What you said at the beginning too, a lot of it I think does actually hold up pretty well. And yes, there are things that are clearly older, but the concepts and the ideas translate, I think, really directly. The situations are still funny. You know, sometimes humor can be very, very situational, and over time it loses that. Well, I think one good example is that Scotland episode that we keep talking about, right? Like it was a spoof at the time and we missed out on that. And so that part wasn't funny. But most of the show isn't doing that. Most of the show, they were creating situations for the first time on the show.
Yeah.
And I think that they still, yeah.
I also always love seeing older sitcoms and seeing how technology plays such a huge role in what makes the situation a situation.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we can't reach this person because they're out and we don't know where they are. And so it's like now sitcoms are so different because of cell phones, you know? But even back then it wasn't just cell phones. It was like in these episodes, her mom was staying with their son and taking care of him and forwarding them all of their mail. And so like they like set up mail forwarding because they had been there for so long.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine like what mail, like, oh no, I miss like the political ads that I got. It's like what, you know, like that's not a thing. So it is interesting, like thinking about like what life was like, even though it's not like a sitcom. Like there are elements that were just how things were back then, and so it's kind of interesting. I think.
Yeah, one of the other ones like that stood out to me. There was one point where Lucy goes out to when she goes to find that babysitter, and she's going to go to try and get that affidavit signed, and she asks Ethel, "Can you stay in our apartment in case the doctor calls? I don't want to miss his call." Because there are not only are there no cell phones, but if you're old enough, you'll remember these things called answering machines.
Yeah.
That we had, right? So that it would record, you could leave a message for someone if you weren't home, since we didn't actually have those cell phones quite yet. And so that didn't even exist. So if you called someone and they weren't home,
too bad.
Not only did you not get a hold of them, but you also didn't know that they called.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't see missed calls. They don't have a chance to leave a message for you. Yeah.
Nope. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was really
interesting. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
All right.
By the way, I read a little bit more about Brigadoon, the film.
Okay.
And Gene Kelly is the main character.
Oh, from Singing in the Rain.
Yes. And they wanted to film it in Scotland, but there was such terrible weather at the time. And actually, two of them, Kelly and the producer Arthur Freed, traveled to Scotland to confirm for themselves that the weather was so bad that they couldn't film.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So then instead they filmed in Big Sur, which is near Monterey, and they found an area that looks similar to Scotland.
Oh, interesting.
And now I totally want to watch that movie.
I know. Well, like I said earlier, we're recording this the week of Thanksgiving. We're going to have some time. Maybe we'll watch Brigadoon.
It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. It won a Golden Globe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a big thing, and it's recognized on different like AFI lists as well.
So better than the version in the I Love Lucy episode.
Yes. So watch I Love Lucy, guys. But instead of watching that Scotland episode, watch Brigadoon. Or then watch the Scotland episode and maybe you'd get some of the references. We'll do the reverse of that.
Yeah, we're definitely doing it backwards.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, that was a fun sort of way of looking at travel through TV. So thank you for that, Cheryl. That was a great idea.
So fun. Yay.
But now we are going to transition to the last segment, and we're actually going to go back to a version of the segment that we did over the summer, since we're, kind of rehashing some of our summerness anyway, which is, instead of Wish You Were Here, we're going to do a Wish You'd Stay Home, because Cheryl and I were talking before we started recording, and chances are good that Christmas this year is not going to be the same as a normal year. Things are not open. Things are closed. We're, at least here in our state, it looks like we'll probably be told to avoid doing lots of indoor things. And in Washington, that doesn't leave a lot of options. Like if you're in, South Texas or Arizona or Southern California, you might still be able to do stuff outside. Yeah, no, not so much here.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I'm so worried for restaurants too. It just makes me
Yeah.
sad. Because in the summer there was like, ooh, outdoor dining.
Yeah.
Not right now. But
and I mean, they still technically can. And I know I've seen a few places that have heaters installed outside. And
yeah.
so but I think people are just less inclined to eat outside.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When it gets dark so much earlier.
Yeah.
And then if it's wet or just cold, like all of those things, I think discourage the outdoorness. But so here's what we're going to do. Instead, we're going to talk about what are some fun holiday kind of traditions or things that we can do that don't involve going outside or being with large groups of people.
Well, one of my favorites from my childhood that is still something that brings me so much joy. I'm guessing you did it too. Did you go Christmas light looking?
Oh, yes.
Oh, Christmas light looking. This is going to be the COVID activity this year, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because like I doubt like in our area we have like Snowflake Lane, which is like a little mini parade with Christmassy things like every night between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And but there's all these different fun Christmas activities I know normally that are in person. And if we all stay in our own cars and promise not to get out of our cars, then maybe we can see lights that way.
Yep.
And so that's something my family did every year. We'd get in our PJs, which is a really big deal. My parents didn't normally let us go anywhere in pajamas. They felt like that was like not appropriate or something. And so it was a big deal. Got to get in PJs and bring our pillows in our car, and we each got a candy cane. And then we would go Christmas light looking. And there was always like this place in Issaquah, this one little neighborhood called Nutcracker Lane that we went to. And we kind of scope out the good neighborhoods. And then eventually, when the Seattle area got its first Krispy Kreme donuts, that was in Issaquah. So then the new tradition included you go by Krispy Kreme, get the donuts, and then you go to Nutcracker Lane. And so, but I love Christmas light looking, and I'm sure my family will be doing that again. My little family. And it's an activity that we can do right now where we can get out. So
it is. I mean, get out of your house and get into your car. But
still get to get out.
And I don't know if you knew this or not, Cheryl, but there are a lot of websites now where they will like actually highlight where really good houses are that have been decorated. So you can even use your little Google Maps trick, go through, find the locations, star them, and then create a route to drive.
Oh, I'm totally doing that. That sounds great. Yeah, I'm so on board with that. That sounds great. Ryan, what's one of your wish you stayed homes for Christmas?
So I've got so many things in my head that I'm thinking about, and I'm trying to decide which one to mention. So I might just mention multiple ones, and we're just going to have to live with that. I think one of the ones that I really enjoy, we've kind of already talked about this, binge watching. But I love binge watching Christmas movies.
Yes.
And I think I even still have it on VHS, the tape that we had all of our Christmas movies that we watched growing up. Because we had recorded them off of TV back in the day. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then I'm sorry. That just means you're a lot younger than me. And it was like we would watch them every single year. And, some of them are really high quality and some of them not so much, right? Like the Charlie Brown Christmas was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like really good. And other ones are ones that very few people have heard of, like Jim Henson's A Christmas Toy. Most people have not heard of that.
I don't know.
I enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot. Both of my sisters say it's creepy. Fine. I still really like it.
You love Jim Henson.
I do, though. I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. But anyway, and so you could make a day or an evening out of watching Christmas movies. You could, again, kind of a similar theme, everybody in your family could put on your Christmas PJs or Christmas shirts or hats or whatever it is you want. Get all comfy and cozy. You can make some hot chocolate or hot apple cider or, whatever you want that to be for your family, where it's cozy and fun, and just sit and watch the movies that you grew up with. And, new ones too. You can, bring in new ones. But I think there's something fun about the nostalgia of things when you grew up and things that you have watched from year after year. And I think that is just a really fun idea. And you can do that if you're by yourself too, like me.
Well, and you have the nostalgia of, I'm guessing, the commercials?
Yeah.
Okay,
those were recorded also. Absolutely.
Here's what I'm remembering from our tapes of Christmas movies. I'm remembering a Sprite commercial where the little red dot on the Sprite can goes on some crazy adventure through someone's house that's decorated for Christmas, and he's like, wow, and then ends up back on the Sprite can, that little red dot. And then I'm remembering an Oreo one with kids sneaking Oreos.
Okay.
And I'm remembering those are both food related. There were probably more food related ones too,
Oh yeah.
Those are the two. What are you remembering the commercials from your tape?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm hearing the soundtracks play back in my head.
Really?
And the ones that I'm remembering, I think, are significantly older than the ones that you're remembering.
Okay.
Because I think my parents started recording them when I was too young to remember. So that was the early to mid 80s.
Yeah.
Right.
And mine would have been late 80s, early 90s when these tapes were being recorded.
Yeah. And I think, some of ours might be from then, but I think that it was earlier than that. I don't know for sure. But I remember there's an M&M commercial where they're actually singing about the milk chocolate melts in your mouth, not in your hand. I don't know. Anyway, it's just random. And then there's one where there's a grandpa and he's on the phone with his granddaughter and reading a Christmas story to her. And I think it's a telephone company commercial, I think, for was MCI, was that a thing? I think that was a thing. I think that was the name of a telephone company back in the day. So that's one. This is gonna sound terrible, but there are some commercials where it was for a missing person. That's one of the ones that's on it.
Boy.
So I remember that one because it says last scene, and then it cuts out. Yeah. So there's a number of, I think there's one for Doublemint gum that has a bunch of twins.
Oh, okay.
There's one for action figures for He-Man.
Oh,
and
cute.
It's a couple of different boys and they're playing with it and they, what's the
I'm
name
remembering
of the thing?
a Power Wheels commercial. Power Wheels. I'm remembering that.
I remember that. Yeah.
So fun.
Oh yeah. So there's.
Do you have a VHS player?
I do still have a VHS player.
You are a child of the 80s. I love that.
Well, I still have some of the old VHS tapes. At some point.
You got to turn those to discs.
Oh, I did. a number of years ago. I did that for my family for Christmas, where I ripped them all and I put them onto DVD.
That's great.
Because I wanted to make sure that we all, since we live in different places, that we could all have them and we could all watch them with all the commercials, right? No, nothing edited out, all the bad quality, all of that stuff, because that's part of the nostalgia. And on that note, I think it's time to bring this Christmas / 50s episode to a close. But we would love it if you would follow us on social media. We are at TimWe Podcast. That's at TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast. We are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us suggestions of guests we should have on, topics we should cover, and please tell us TV shows that include characters traveling that we should be watching. Because who knows, maybe this is our next theme for next summer. We don't know. And so we want to know, like, what comes to mind for you when you think about a show that is not a travel show where people are traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. You can also call us and leave us a voicemail. The number here is 406-763-8699. Or, if it's easier to remember, 406-POD-TIMWE. We would love it if you would rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think, share about this episode on social media, and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
That's all we got this week. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yay!
And until next time, remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. All the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles here wanting to be